Sign it, Grant, and you lose us. Marin Whitlock's voice was quiet, but every wolf in the royal council chamber heard her. Rain pressed against the tall windows of Ravenport Palace while 12 counselors sat beneath the carved crest of the hawthorn crown. Marin stood alone at the far end of the table, one hand resting over the gentle curve of her 5-month pregnancy. Across from her, Alpha King Grant Hawthorne stared at the document waiting beneath his hand. The royal accord required one signature. His. Lord Conrad Mercer stood beside him. 3 northern packs have given us until sunrise, Conrad said. Without the accord, they withdraw from Ravenport. Trade routes close. Winter grain stops moving. Thousands of families could suffer. Grant looked toward Marin. He had barely slept in 4 nights. Reports covered the table around him. Projected food shortages, border unrest, treasury losses, warnings from alpha leaders who claimed Ravenport was approaching division. Every page said the same thing. Choose stability now or watch the kingdom fracture later. Marin had read enough of those reports to understand what Grant feared. She also understood what the council wanted him to sacrifice. The accord would bind the crown to an approved alpha bloodline through a future political marriage. It would strip Marin of recognition as Grant's intended Luna and remove their unborn child from the royal succession. There has to be another way, Grant said. Conrad answered before Marin could. We searched for one. Marin's eyes shifted toward the first minister. Something about his certainty unsettled her. He never sounded frightened by the crisis. He sounded prepared for it. If I refuse, Grant said, people I may never meet could lose food, medicine, work. Marin's fingers tightened over her coat. Then protect them. Grant looked at her. But do not tell yourself that abandoning us is the same thing. The room went still. Conrad stepped closer to the table. Your Majesty, a king sometimes has to sacrifice what he loves to save people he may never meet. Marin turned toward him. Interesting how easily people speak about sacrifice when someone else has to become it. Conrad's expression barely changed. Grant closed his eyes for one moment. When he opened them, Marin saw the answer before his hand moved. Grant. He picked up the pen. If there were another way, I would take it. Her throat tightened. Then find one. I do not have time. You have until sunrise. And if I gamble wrong? His voice broke beneath the weight he was trying to hide. What do I tell thousands of people? Marin looked at the man she loved, then at the counselors waiting for him to choose their definition of duty. Tell them the truth, she said. Tell them their king was asked to abandon his family before anyone would agree to help them. Grant lowered the pen. For one heartbeat, hope rose inside her. Then the nib touched paper. His signature crossed the bottom of the accord. Marin felt no dramatic breaking inside her. Only silence. She reached beneath her collar and removed the silver royal pendant Grant had given her when he promised she would never have to face Ravenport alone. She placed it beside his signature. Then your kingdom has its answer. Marin, please. No, her voice remained gentle. You made your choice. Do not ask me to make it easier for you to live with. She turned and walked from the chamber without looking back. Grant remained beside the signed accord long after the doors closed. Conrad quietly gathered the reports. By dawn, Marin's rooms were empty. Her clothes were gone. The small wooden cradle Grant had ordered remained untouched near the window. So did every royal gift he had ever given her. On the bedside table lay a sealed medical envelope from Dr. Evelyn Shaw. Grant opened it with unsteady hands. Inside was the first clear image of his unborn child. Beneath it, in Marin's handwriting, were 6 words he would remember long after his kingdom began falling apart. You chose before meeting your child. Grant found Marin's note at 6:12 in the morning. By 6:15, he had ordered his car brought to the east entrance. By 6:17, Conrad Mercer was standing between him and the palace doors. Move. Grant's voice was low. Conrad did not. The northern delegation arrives in 40 minutes. If you leave now, they will interpret it as abandonment of the accord. Grant held the medical envelope in one hand. The image inside seemed impossibly small for something that had already changed the shape of his life. Marin is 5 months pregnant and somewhere outside this palace. She left voluntarily. Grant's eyes hardened. Because of a document you told me would save Ravenport. A document you signed because the alternative threatened thousands. Conrad stepped aside just enough to make the choice visible. Go after her if you wish. But by noon, every Northern Alpha will know their king abandoned emergency negotiations to chase an Omega who walked away from him. Grant hated how carefully the words were chosen. Not Marin. An Omega. Not his unborn child. A political inconvenience. I can be back tonight. Perhaps. Or perhaps the delegates leave before you return. If that happens, grain contracts collapse with them. Grant looked through the tall windows toward the rain-dark road beyond the gates. Somewhere on that road was Marin. He could still go. For several seconds, his hand remained on the door. Then a palace aide appeared behind Conrad. Your Majesty, the Northern representatives have arrived early. Grant closed his eyes. The second choice felt quieter than the first. That made it worse. He lowered his hand. Have Captain Reese locate Marin. No confrontation. No order to return. I only want to know she is safe. Conrad nodded. Of course. Grant walked back toward the council chamber with the medical envelope still in his hand. 120 miles away, Marin sat beside the window of a northbound bus as Ravenport disappeared behind gray hills. She had changed into a simple wool coat and tied her hair back loosely. No royal pendant rested at her throat now. Her canvas bag held 3 changes of clothes, prenatal vitamins, a little cash she had saved before moving into the palace, and a pair of tiny white socks Dr. Evelyn Shaw had given her after the pregnancy was confirmed. Every few miles, Marin felt the baby move. Each flutter reminded her why she had left. She could forgive fear. She could understand impossible responsibility. What she could not do was raise a child inside a palace where love could be negotiated whenever powerful men called it duty. By afternoon, the bus reached Belmere, a mountain town surrounded by pine-covered ridges and late winter snow. Evelyn had once told Marin about a small community clinic there run by an old friend. Marin had never imagined she would arrive carrying everything she owned. Back in Ravenport, Grant spent 9 hours negotiating with the Northern delegation. He agreed to shipping protections, emergency funding, and every condition required by the Royal Accord. Shortly after sunset, the representatives shook his hand and promised formal confirmation within the week. Conrad called it a victory. Grant felt nothing resembling one. That night, Captain Reese reported that Marin had traveled north but had deliberately avoided royal transportation. Her final destination remained uncertain. Grant unfolded the image of his child again. Keep looking, he said. Quietly. Conrad watched from the doorway. You made the necessary choice today. Grant looked at him. Do not call it necessary yet. 7 days later, the answer arrived. Grant entered the morning council meeting expecting signed confirmations from the Northern Pacts. Instead, 3 sealed letters waited on his desk. He opened the first, then the second. By the third, no one in the room was speaking. All 3 Northern Pacts were withdrawing from the alliance anyway. Grant slowly raised his eyes toward Conrad. You said signing the accord would stop this. Conrad's face remained composed. Something has changed. Grant looked down at the Royal Accord, then at the medical image he had carried every day since Marin left. He had sacrificed his family for stability. 1 week later, Marin was gone. His unborn child was somewhere beyond his reach, and the kingdom he had chosen over them was beginning to fracture anyway. 7 days after Marin left, Ravenport began discovering how expensive one's signature could become. The first warning arrived before breakfast. 2 grain convoys scheduled from the Northern Territories never reached the capital distribution yards. By noon, 3 rural clinics reported that their medical deliveries had been delayed without explanation. Before sunset, the Treasury Office found nearly $400,000 assigned to emergency transportation sitting in an account no regional administrator recognized. Grant stood at the head of the council table while reports accumulated before him. I want every shipment traced, he said. And every dollar. Conrad Mercer remained composed. The withdrawals have disrupted established routes. Temporary shortages were inevitable. You told me the accord would prevent the withdrawals. I told you it was our best chance. Grant looked up sharply. 7 days earlier, Conrad had sounded considerably more certain. Where are the grain shipments? We are investigating. Who authorized the transfer of emergency funds? Treasury is investigating that as well. Grant pushed back from the table. Everyone seems to be investigating. Nobody seems to know anything. By the second week, the problem had spread beyond numbers on paper. Families from smaller northern communities began arriving farther south because local food prices were climbing. Pharmacies rationed basic supplies. 2 community clinics reduced their operating hours. Grant ordered emergency reserves released, but even that process moved strangely slowly. Every delay seemed to pass through offices controlled by men Conrad had recommended. Then Grant noticed a name repeated across several canceled delivery schedules. Whitlock Relief Network. Marin had built it 18 months earlier after discovering that isolated towns waited weeks longer than wealthy districts for medical supplies. She had coordinated volunteer drivers, clinic inventories, food deliveries, and emergency housing through a system the council had dismissed as charitable work. Grant summoned Elias Ward, keeper of the Crown records. How much of our rural distribution depended on this network? Elias adjusted his glasses and studied the reports. More than anyone appears to have told you, Your Majesty. How much? Nearly 30% of medical deliveries to the western and northern rural districts passed through routes Miss Whitlock helped coordinate. Grant stared at him. Why was I never shown that figure? Elias hesitated. Because her network was categorized as auxiliary relief rather than royal infrastructure. In other words, because Marin was an Omega working quietly, the palace had treated essential work as something decorative. Grant looked toward the empty chair where she used to sit during public welfare meetings. He had believed removing her from succession would preserve Ravenport. Instead, the kingdom was discovering how much she had been holding together without a title. That evening, another report reached him. Belmere Community Clinic had requested emergency prenatal medicine, antibiotics, and infant supplies twice in 6 days. Both requests had been delayed. Grant froze at the town name. Captain Reese had finally traced Marin there that morning. She is in Belmere? Yes, Your Majesty. She appears to be staying near the community clinic. Grant immediately reached for the supply request. A red administrative stamp crossed the top. Deferred pending regional review. Who deferred this? Elias examined the authorization code. His expression changed. The order originated from the First Minister's administrative office. Grant looked toward the closed council doors. Conrad. His office, Elias corrected carefully. That does not prove he personally issued it. Grant understood the distinction. He also understood coincidence was becoming increasingly difficult to believe. Release the Belmere shipment immediately. Double it. Yes, Your Majesty. Then audit every delayed medical and grain request from the last 30 days. Do not send the results through the First Minister's office. Elias looked at him. Where should I send them? Directly to me. After Elias left, Grant remained alone beneath the dim council lights. He removed the medical image from his inside pocket. Marin had been gone 14 days. Their child was somewhere in Belmere, while a clinic there waited for medicine his own government had delayed. For the first time, Grant stopped asking how Ravenport had begun falling apart after Marin left. A colder question replaced it. What if the kingdom had already been falling apart, and someone had convinced him? That Marin was the price required to save it. Grant reached Belmere shortly after 9 the next morning and discovered Marin before anyone had time to announce the king had arrived. She was standing outside the community clinic beneath a gray mountain sky, one hand supporting a cardboard box while the other rested instinctively near the curve of her belly. A line of families stretched from the clinic entrance toward the church across the street. Grant stopped beside his car. He had imagined finding Marin resting somewhere quiet, protected from the crisis consuming Ravenport. Instead, she was directing volunteers toward tables stacked with canned food, blankets, and the medical supplies he had ordered released the night before. Put the infant formula inside, she told a volunteer. Keep the diapers near the front. Mrs. Callahan cannot stand long, so bring her box to the car. Her voice carried the same calm authority Grant remembered from palace relief meetings, except here nobody dismissed it because she lacked an alpha title. People listened because Marin knew what they needed. Grant walked closer. A little girl holding her mother's hand noticed him first. Marin, she called. Is that the king? Conversations faded. Marin turned. For one unguarded second, surprise crossed her face. Then it disappeared. Grant. No title. He deserved none from her. I needed to see you. You found me. His eyes moved toward the clinic. The shipment arrived? At 4 this morning. I doubled it. Then families in 2 neighboring towns will have medicine this week. She said it without gratitude, only acknowledgement. Grant realized how foolish he had been to imagine one corrected shipment might matter personally to her. A woman approached Marin carrying a clipboard. We have 12 more families from North Ridge asking for temporary housing. Use the church basement tonight. I will call the motel on Cedar Road about tomorrow. Grant stared at her. You organized all this. Marin looked around at the volunteers. We organized it. You have been here 2 weeks. People were already struggling when I arrived. A young boy stepped around a supply table and looked directly at Grant. Are you the king who stopped our medicine? His mother immediately pulled him closer. Caleb, that is enough. Grant could have explained that he had never ordered the delay. He could have blamed an administrative office he had only begun investigating. Instead, he looked at the child. I am the king who should have known it was happening. Marin's expression shifted slightly. Caleb seemed satisfied with the answer and returned to his mother. Grant waited until the distribution line shortened before following Marin inside. The clinic smelled faintly of coffee and antiseptic. Shelves along one wall remained nearly empty despite the new delivery. Come home, Grant said. Marin stopped. Why? Because you should not have to manage this while you are pregnant. I am not managing it because I am pregnant. I am helping because people need help. That is not what I meant. Then what did you mean? Grant struggled for the right words. I was wrong to let you leave alone. Marin faced him fully. You did not lose me when I left the palace. Her voice remained soft. You lost me when you signed your name. I thought I was protecting thousands of people. Marin walked to the pantry and opened the door. Grant saw half-empty shelves, carefully divided food boxes, and handwritten ration lists. Then look at what your sacrifice bought. He said nothing. Families are arriving here because grain stopped reaching their towns. Mothers are driving 40 miles for medicine. Your council called me a threat to stability while the system they protected was failing underneath them. Grant looked at the shelves. I am investigating Conrad's office. Marin became still. Why Conrad? Belmir's medical shipment was deliberately deferred through his administration. Something unreadable entered her eyes. Grant, Dr. Shaw sent my prenatal records to the palace clinic before the council meeting. I know. No. Marin lowered her voice. You know I was pregnant. You do not know who accessed those records. Grant looked at her. What are you saying? Marin held his gaze. 2 days before the Accord meeting, Evelyn told me someone requested my pregnancy file under Emergency Succession Authority. The room seemed suddenly colder. Who? She was never told. Grant thought of Conrad standing beside the Royal Accord, prepared for every objection before Marin had spoken. He remembered the reports, the deadlines, the certainty. Marin placed a hand over their child. If your investigation is real, Grant, stop asking who benefited after I left. Her eyes did not leave his. Find out who needed me gone before you ever signed that paper. Grant did not return to Ravenport immediately. He stood in the clinic pantry staring at shelves that should never have been empty, while Marin's questions settled into the silence between them. Who needed her gone before he signed the accord? Come back with me, he said at last. Marin's expression hardened. You are still asking the wrong thing. If someone accessed your medical records and manipulated the council, you may not be safe here. Do not turn this into a reason to put me back inside the palace. I am trying to protect you. You already had that chance. The words were quiet, but Grant felt them more deeply than anger. Marin closed the pantry door. You chose already. Based on information I now believe was manipulated. And who signed? Grant went still. I did. Who looked at me carrying your child and decided a political agreement mattered more than asking whether the people advising you were telling the truth? I did. Marin nodded. Then do not make Conrad responsible for the part that belongs to you. Grant lowered his eyes. He had come to Belmir hoping to explain the impossible position he had faced. Standing inside a clinic that had nearly run out of medicine because of decisions made under his crown, explanations sounded smaller than consequences. I thought I was saving Ravenport. I know. Marin led him through the clinic and stopped beside a storage room where volunteers were dividing food into family boxes. Mrs. Callahan drove 38 miles yesterday because her town has not received a grain shipment in 9 days. The Henderson family is sleeping in a church basement because work disappeared when their distribution center closed. Tell them what your sacrifice saved. Grant watched a volunteer place 2 cans of soup into a box because there was not enough for 3. Nothing, he said. Marin looked at him. Not yet. Those 2 words held something he had not expected. Not forgiveness. A demand. What do you want me to do? Stop trying to choose between me and Ravenport. Grant frowned. That was the choice they gave me. Exactly. Marin stepped closer. And you never asked why. He remembered Conrad's reports arriving one after another, each more urgent than the last. 3 northern packs. Sunrise deadline. Grain collapse. Political marriage. Every road had somehow led to the same solution Conrad already had prepared. I need proof. Then find it. And you? Marin rested her hand over her belly. I stay here. Marin, I am not returning because you discovered you might have been deceived. You still made the choice. Grant swallowed. What about our child? Pain crossed her face, but her voice remained steady. Our child deserves a father. That does not automatically mean I owe that father my trust. Grant had no answer because she was right. A knock sounded at the clinic entrance. Elias Ward entered carrying a leather document case, his coat still wet from the mountain road. He stopped when he saw Marin. Miss Whitlock. Then he looked at Grant. Your Majesty, I found something. Grant's attention sharpened. What? Elias opened the case on a nearby table. The emergency projections presented before the Accord meeting were not the original Treasury projections. He placed 2 reports side by side. The numbers were different, dramatically different. The original forecast predicted disruption if the northern packs withdrew, Elias said, but nothing close to the shortages Conrad presented to the council. Grant stared at the authorization marks. Who altered them? I am tracing that now, but there is more. Elias produced a copy of a protected access log from the Royal Medical Archive. Marin became completely still. Your pregnancy file was accessed 48 hours before the council meeting. Grant looked at the authorization code. First Minister's office. Conrad knew. Elias nodded slowly. Someone in his office did. Find out who. I already requested the individual authorization. Elias hesitated. The response arrived while I was driving here. He removed one final sheet. Grant read the name at the bottom. Conrad Mercer. The clinic seemed to fall silent around them. Marin stared at the signature, one hand instinctively covering their unborn child. Grant remembered Conrad telling him that sacrifice was the burden of kingship. Now the truth looked different. Conrad had not discovered Marin's pregnancy after constructing the Accord. He had known before placing it on the table. Grant lifted his eyes from the document. For the first time, he understood that Marin and their child might never have been unfortunate casualties of the crisis. They might have been targets of it. Conrad did not discover the crisis, Elias said. He built it. Grant stared at the documents spread across the clinic table while Marin stood beside him, one hand resting over their unborn child. The medical access log had already proved Conrad knew about the pregnancy before the Royal Accord. What Elias revealed next was worse. He opened a ledger containing shipping authorizations from the previous 2 months. These grain convoys were redirected before any northern pack announced withdrawal. Grant followed the dates. 3 weeks before the council meeting. Yes. Elias placed another record beside it. And these medical shipments were rerouted through warehouses controlled by administrators appointed through Conrad's office. Marin looked at the pages. So the shortages started before the crisis. Quietly, Elias said. Small enough that individual towns blamed transportation delays. Large enough to create the projections Conrad later presented as evidence of collapse. Grant felt something cold settle inside him. The Alpha leaders? Elias opened a final folder. Payments were made through private accounts connected to 2 northern representatives. We cannot yet prove every leader knew what Conrad was doing. But these 2 received substantial transfers shortly before threatening secession. Marin understood first. He paid them to frighten the crown. Elias nodded. That is what the records suggest. Grant walked toward the clinic window. Outside, volunteers carried food boxes toward waiting families. Conrad had stood inside the council chamber and warned that innocent people would suffer unless Grant sacrificed Marin. All the while, suffering had been part of the design. Why? Grant asked. Elias removed a copy of the Royal Accord. Section 14. Grant read it. He had seen the clause before, but under the pressure of the deadline he had treated it as ceremonial language. If the recognized Luna came from an approved Alpha bloodline, a Regency Council would receive expanded authority over the education, guardianship, and succession preparation of any royal heir. Marin stepped closer. And our child? Elias looked at her. If you remain Grant's recognized mate, the child would enter succession outside that arrangement. The council would have far less authority. Marin's face went pale. So Conrad needed me removed before the baby was born. That appears to be the purpose. Grant turned back toward the records. He wanted control of my successor. And the offices surrounding that successor, Elias said. The accord would strengthen the council for an entire generation. Silence followed. Marin looked through the window at the families Conrad had reduced to numbers in his plan. He knew clinics would run short. Elias nodded reluctantly. The records indicate his office received shortage warnings. And he continued diverting supplies. Yes. Grant remembered Conrad's words. A king sometimes has to sacrifice what he loves to save people he may never meet. The hypocrisy was almost difficult to comprehend. He created their suffering, Grant said, then used it to convince me I had to abandon my family to stop it. Marin looked at him. He created the lie. Grant met her eyes. And I gave it power. She said nothing, but something in her expression changed. Not forgiveness. Recognition that he was finally refusing the easiest excuse. Elias gathered the records. There is enough here to begin a formal investigation, but Conrad still controls several administrative offices. If he learns what we have, records could disappear. Grant's voice became steady. Make copies. 3 sets. 1 stays with you. 1 goes directly to the Chief Justice. The 3rd remains here with Marin. Here. Marin asked. Conrad knows I am investigating. He does not know what you know. Grant looked at her. I will not order you anywhere. But I will not let the only evidence exist inside a palace he has spent years learning to control. Before Marin could answer, Grant's phone rang. Captain Reese was calling from Ravenport. Grant answered. Your Majesty, the First Minister has summoned an emergency council session for tomorrow morning. On whose authority? He claims the northern crisis requires immediate action. Grant's eyes moved to the royal accord. What action? Reese hesitated. A vote to expand the Regency Council's emergency powers. Marin heard enough to understand. Conrad was no longer protecting his plan. He was accelerating it. Grant ended the call and looked at the woman he had once abandoned because he believed his kingdom demanded it. He wants me back in Ravenport. Marin held his gaze. Then this time, make sure you understand what you are going back there to save. This time, I choose you. Grant said it before he could hide behind the crown again. The clinic had grown quiet around them. Elias stood several feet away with the copied records, while evening snow drifted beyond the windows of Belmere. Marin looked at Grant for a long moment. Weeks earlier, those words might have been everything she wanted to hear. Now they frightened her for an entirely different reason. No, Grant blinked. No. Do not do that. Marin, Conrad built this crisis to separate us. He used our child, the northern pacts, the shortages, all of it. I will not make the same mistake twice. Then stop thinking the opposite mistake will fix the first one. Grant stared at her. Marin stepped closer. You abandoned me for Ravenport because Conrad convinced you those were the only choices. Now you are standing here ready to abandon Ravenport for me because you still believe those are the only choices. If I return tomorrow, Conrad controls the council. Then take it back from him. He could force a vote before I expose the evidence. Then expose it before the vote. Grant looked toward Elias. We do not have every record yet. Elias answered carefully. We have enough to challenge the emergency authority, but Conrad will attack the evidence and claim the shortages came from the northern withdrawals. Marin pointed toward the document case. Then do not go back with only numbers. Grant frowned. What do you mean? She gestured toward the clinic beyond them. Take the truth those numbers created. Bring the clinic reports. Bring the delayed shipment orders. Bring statements from the towns that stopped receiving grain before the packs withdrew. Let Conrad explain why his emergency began before the emergency existed. Elias slowly nodded. That establishes chronology. And get Dr. Shaw's statement about my medical file, Marin continued. If Conrad accessed it before the Accord meeting, let him explain why the First Minister needed confidential pregnancy records to solve a grain crisis. Grant looked at her, and for the first time he understood why Ravenport had depended on Marin long before anyone considered making her Luna. She saw people where the council saw categories. She saw connections where powerful men hid behind procedure. Come with me, he said. Marin's expression immediately closed. Grant corrected himself. Not because I need you beside me. Because you deserve to speak if you want to. I do not. The answer surprised him. Conrad tried to remove you and our child from succession. Then you exposed that. I do not need to stand in the room where you chose against me so everyone can watch me prove I deserved better. Grant absorbed the words. All right. No argument. No command. Marin looked toward the snow outside. Go back, Grant. If the council removes me, then lose the crown telling the truth instead of keeping it by accepting a lie. His eyes remained on hers. And if I stop Conrad, then Ravenport gets a better king. And us. Marin rested her hand over the child moving beneath her coat. Do not make us your reward for doing what you should have done. The answer hurt, but he understood why it had to. I will not. Elias closed. The document case. If we leave within the hour, we can reach Ravenport before midnight. Grant nodded, then looked at Marin once more. I am sorry. She did not rescue him from the weight of those words. Show me. Grant left Belmere with Elias shortly after sunset. During the drive south, copies of the evidence traveled separately to the Chief Justice and Crown Records Office. Dr. Evelyn Shaw agreed to provide a sworn statement. 3 rural administrators confirmed that shortages had begun weeks before the northern withdrawal notices. Shortly before midnight, Captain Reese called. Your Majesty, Conrad changed the council session. Grant looked out at Ravenport's distant lights. To when? Midnight. He says delay threatens national stability. Grant checked the clock. 11:43. Seal the council chamber. No vote begins without the crown present. Reese hesitated. Conrad says emergency law gives him authority to proceed. Grant's expression became still. Then tell him the king is 17 minutes away. When the palace towers appeared beyond the rain, Grant understood what Marin had tried to teach him. He had never truly been choosing between his family and his kingdom. The real choice had always been between fear and integrity. This time, Conrad Mercer would not be allowed to make it for him. Stop the vote. Grant's voice struck the council chamber at 11:58, 2 minutes before Conrad Mercer intended to claim emergency authority over Ravenport. Every head turned toward the doors. Grant entered with Elias Ward beside him and Captain Reese several steps behind. Rain darkened the shoulders of Grant's coat, but he did not slow until he reached the long table where Conrad stood beside the royal accord. Your Majesty, Conrad said evenly, we believed you would not arrive in time. You moved the session to midnight. The kingdom cannot wait while its king handles personal matters. Grant placed a document case on the table. Neither can the truth. Conrad's expression barely shifted. Grant opened the case and removed the original treasury projections. You told this council the northern withdrawals would create immediate shortages, severe enough to threaten thousands. They have. These forecasts were prepared before the accord meeting. They predict disruption, not collapse. Grant placed the altered versions beside them. These are the reports you presented. The numbers were changed. Murmurs moved around the chamber. Conrad remained calm. Emergency projections evolve. Before or after grain shipments were deliberately redirected, Elias distributed copies of the shipping records. Dates appeared in clean black ink. 3 weeks before the northern packs threatened withdrawal, convoys had already been diverted away from rural districts. Grant added clinic records next. Medical deliveries were delayed through administrators connected to your office. Belmere requested supplies twice. Both requests were deferred while you told me Ravenport needed greater emergency control. Conrad looked around the table. Administrative failures do not constitute conspiracy. Then explain the payments. Elias placed financial records before the Chief Justice. 2 northern representatives had received substantial transfers through private accounts linked to Conrad's associates shortly before issuing their withdrawal threats. For the first time, Conrad's composure weakened. Those transactions require context. You will have an opportunity to provide it, Grant said. Before the High Tribunal. Conrad's eyes narrowed. You are accusing your first minister because an Omega turned you against your council. Grant became very still. Do not use Marin to hide from what you did. He placed one final record on the table. 48 hours before the accord meeting, you personally authorized access to her protected medical file. Silence swallowed the room. You knew she was pregnant before you demanded an agreement designed to remove her and my child from succession. Conrad looked toward the counselors as though searching for the authority he had always found there. Everything I did was for Ravenport. Grant placed the falsified projections, diverted shipment records, and medical authorization together. No, everything you did was for the power you believed Ravenport owed you. Conrad's voice sharpened. And you signed the accord. Grant did not look away. Yes. The answer unsettled the room more than denial would have. Conrad manufactured the crisis. He manipulated records. He used suffering he helped create to frighten this council. But I signed the paper. Grant's voice lowered. He built the lie. I was the king who gave that lie power. The Chief Justice rose. Based on the documentary evidence and sworn statements already submitted, the High Tribunal had authorized an immediate preliminary inquiry. Conrad was suspended as First Minister, stripped of council authority and access to Crown records, and placed in lawful royal custody, pending formal proceedings. Accounts connected to the suspected corruption were frozen. The two northern representatives named in the payment records would face separate investigation, along with every official who knowingly assisted the scheme. Court officers approached. Conrad looked at Grant. You will destroy your own government for her. No, Grant replied. I am rebuilding it for the people you used. Conrad's insignia was removed, and he was escorted from the chamber without ceremony. No counselor followed him. Grant turned toward the royal accord. This document was obtained through manipulated evidence and concealed conflicts of interest. Effective immediately, its enforcement is suspended pending judicial review. He ordered grain routes restored, emergency medical shipments released, and independent oversight placed over royal crisis powers. Then he looked around the chamber. No person in Ravenport will ever again be treated as expendable because powerful people find their rank inconvenient. Nearly 120 miles away, Marin stood beside a radio in the Belmere Clinic as the midnight address reached the mountain towns. She heard Grant expose Conrad. She heard him accept his own responsibility. And when Grant said her name, he did not call her his Omega or his future Luna. He called her Marin Whitlock, the woman whose work had helped keep Ravenport's forgotten communities alive. Marin placed a hand over her child as tears quietly filled her eyes. Grant had finally chosen what was right, and for the first time, he had done it without asking her to become the reward. Nearly 4 months later, Grant arrived in Belmere without a crown, a royal car, or a single guard beside him. He carried only a small overnight bag and the medical envelope Marin had left behind the morning she disappeared. Ravenport had changed during those months. Grain routes were operating again. Rural clinics received supplies through an independent distribution board. Emergency powers now required judicial review, and no First Minister could control the information presented to the Crown without independent verification. The royal accord had been permanently nullified. Conrad Mercer's trial had ended 12 days earlier. The High Tribunal convicted him of fraud, bribery, conspiracy, falsification of Crown records, abuse of public authority, unlawful diversion of public resources, manipulation of royal succession, and unauthorized access to protected medical records. He received a lengthy prison sentence and a permanent ban from royal or public office. Assets proven to have come from corruption were forfeited, with recovered funds directed toward rural clinics, grain routes, and communities harmed by his scheme. Officials who knowingly accepted payments or falsified records faced separate prosecution. Grant had refused every petition for royal clemency submitted on Conrad's behalf. Justice, he had learned, could not become another privilege distributed by the Crown. He found Marin behind the Belmere Clinic in a small rented house with white shutters. She was in the final weeks of her pregnancy now. When she opened the door and saw him, neither spoke immediately. You came alone, she finally said. I thought I should. Why are you here? Grant reached inside his coat and removed the medical envelope. Not to ask you to return. Marin looked at the worn edges. You kept it. Every day. He opened the envelope and held out the image of their child. At first I kept this because it reminded me of the moment I failed both of you. Marin took the image but did not look away from him. And now I understand guilt is not the same as change. Grant swallowed. I came to ask what you need. Not what I want. The silence that followed felt different from the silence in the council chamber months earlier. There was no audience here. No Conrad. No Crown demanding an answer. Our child needs a father, Marin said. I want to be one. That does not mean you get me back. I know. Trust will take time. Then I will give it time. Marin studied his face. And Ravenport does not require me to abandon my family to govern it. A faint softness touched her expression. You finally learned. You made the lesson difficult to avoid. Good. Grant almost smiled. Marin looked down at the medical image, then placed it back into his hand. Do not keep this as punishment anymore. His fingers closed carefully around it. What should I keep it as? Proof that this child deserves a father who learned. Grant looked at her, uncertain whether he had heard the invitation hidden inside those words. Marin stepped aside from the doorway. There is a crib in the spare room. A crib? It arrived yesterday. The instructions are terrible. You want me to build it? I am giving you a chance to try. Grant entered the house. Nearly 2 hours later, Marin stood in the doorway watching the Alpha King of Ravenport sit cross-legged on the floor surrounded by wooden pieces, screws, and an instruction booklet he had read 3 times. He tightened one final piece and proudly stood. Marin examined the crib. One side was noticeably higher than the other. Am I doing this right? Grant asked. She tried to remain serious. She failed. Not even close. Her laughter surprised both of them. Grant laughed too, and something that had been broken between them shifted, not healed, but no longer beyond repair. He reached for the instructions again. I can fix it. You had better. Your daughter cannot sleep sideways. Grant froze. Daughter. Marin placed both hands over her belly, smiling through sudden tears. We are having a girl. He looked at her as though the entire world had gone quiet. May I? He stopped before reaching toward her. Marin understood the question. After a moment, she took his hand and gently placed it where their daughter moved. Grant's eyes filled with wonder. No council witnessed it. No law required it. No prophecy promised it. Months earlier, Grant had believed being king meant choosing what he was willing to lose. Now, inside a small house in Belmere, with a crooked crib behind him and Marin standing freely beside him, he finally understood something greater. True strength was never measured by what a powerful man could sacrifice. It was measured by what he was willing to protect without taking away another person's choice.